Hi, welcome to the Friends of the Earth in-district meeting training call. This is Liz Butler. I'm the organizing director for Friends of the Earth. We are going to spend a set of time tonight talking through the upcoming recess and how to handle it, as well as why it's so important, why it's such an important time for influencing Congress. We're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in D.C. and how you can put direct pressure on your member of Congress during the August recess through citizen in-district meetings. Before we get started, I'd also like to mention that we're pulling together a team of activists around the country to be part of a very exciting team called our Rapid Response Team in August. And we're going to be hosting another training call on what that means and how to participate next Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Schreiber, who's going to give us an update of the state of play in D.C. and what's happening in Congress. Ben?
Thanks so much, Liz, and thanks to everyone for joining this call. It's really exciting to have you on here with me. My name is Ben Schreiber, and I'm the Senior Political Strategist at Friends of the Earth. And just start with what's happening in D.C. And what's happening with D.C., big picture is two things. The first is the Russia probe and all things sort of Russia. Jeff Sessions, just a lot of questions about Donald Trump's connections to Russia and his behavior. And that's obviously sucking a lot of the energy and oxygen and media coverage from here in Washington, D.C. The second thing is the health care bill. The expectation is that there will be a vote tomorrow morning in the Senate on some sort of health care bill, which no one has seen and no one knows exactly what it will be. It's a vote on a motion to proceed, which means literally a vote on whether or not there are enough votes for the Senate to even debate the Republican health care bill. It's unclear whether or not there'll be enough votes. I think the assumption is probably not, and it will be a bit of a death knell for the Republican efforts to repeal health care at this time. Obviously, health care and Russia have taken a whole lot of oxygen out of the atmosphere and really focused the attention. And so once those two things, or at least the health care bill, goes away for a while, the focus will switch to the budget and appropriations. But at the same time, even as everyone's been talking here in D.C. about healthcare and the Russia probe, the truth is that the attacks on the environment have been going forward. Today at 5:30 we had a vote on David Bernhardt's nomination to be the number 2 at the Department of Interior. He's a former oil lobbyist who has some really crooked deals with big water agencies in California, and has clients and personal interests that will directly benefit. So this is part of Donald Trump and Zinke's giveaway of public lands from the Department of Interior, and that nomination move forward today. We also saw today this week Donald Trump has sort of finalized the rollback of the methane rules, which would actually regulate fracking pollutants and methane from fracking. And so the continued repeal of the Obama legacy of environmental protection and just the handover of more and more of our government and the functions to the fossil fuel industry. We're also expecting a Senate energy bill in the Senate sometime this week, which or maybe next, but as early as this week, which would pave the way for increased fracking. And so we're seeing, the one place where Donald Trump has really been successful, probably two. One of the two places that Donald Trump has really been successful is rolling back environmental protections, and I think the second is, unfortunately, immigration raids and rolling back attacks on immigrants. So that's kind of what we're seeing happening now, but what we're seeing in the future is that the big fights, really starting as early as this week on the appropriations and spending bills, are going to be starting. And there are a couple of reasons why appropriation bills are so important. The first is that there must pass legislation. if the Congress doesn't pass appropriation bills, it means that the government shuts down. That puts a ton of pressure on the Democratic side to actually acquiesce and take bad deals, because the alternative is really bleak. It's being held responsible for shutting down the government. So that's one. The second is that this is where priorities are seen, and real priorities are seen. And so in these fights, the threshold for votes is less. A lot of what can be done in the budget actually only requires 50 votes in the Senate, and so that makes it much easier for Republicans to get bad things through as part of the budget process. So because of both the high stakes, the stake of actually having to shut down the government to stop things, and because of the lower vote threshold, the budget is where actually some of the worst attacks on the environment are likely to happen. Donald Trump proposed a budget that had massive cuts to EPA, 31% funding decrease, 5,000 or more layoffs within the agency. At the same time, he's also gutting the Department of the Interior by moving scientists out of positions that they're qualified for and into positions to try and sort of force them to resign. So you were seeing this huge attack on the government. So what's going to happen next is this Wednesday, the House is going to actually take up the first appropriations bill. And instead of doing appropriations bills, there are 13 appropriations bills. Instead of doing them one at a time, what the House is doing is they're actually trying to package them together in a big series of appropriations bills, which will actually, I think, from their point strategically, try to mask the massive cuts to EPA that they're proposing as well. The cuts aren't as bad as the cuts that are being proposed by Trump in the House budget, but they're still significant. And what they're doing is they're actually pulling it together with increased spending for defense and also increased money for the border wall. And so it's a real articulation of the priorities of Speaker Ryan and the House Republicans, that they're talking about big cuts to EPA while at the same time having big increases to defense and big cuts to EPA. So that fight's going to start on Wednesday and will continue forward. And then the other big fight is the budget itself. The budget itself is an opportunity for the House and the Senate to have instructions to actually pass riders or put legislative priorities in there. And the big one that folks are gearing up for right now is increased drilling all over the United States. And so we're expecting, as part of the budget process, to have big fights over drilling in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and also the Arctic. So these are the fights that are really gearing up, and we're getting ready for recess. Recess is basically one of the best opportunities to reach out to your member and let them know how angry we are about the bad prioritization that's happening on the part of the Republicans, the Trump administration, and members of Congress. And so these are the fights that are gearing up and that are about to really be center stage as soon as the health care bill probably moves away.
Thanks, Ben. Like Ben was saying, one, it's obviously a very crazy time in D.C., but one of the things about this moment is the appropriations process, which is really the budget process. It's really about where's the money that go into the programs and that actually fund the government. That can get a little lost in this moment, and they can do some really horrible things kind of behind closed doors. But that's why August is so critical. Now, August recess for many people is when they go to the beach or take a vacation. It's also when Congress isn't in session. The expectation is that they're going to spend a ton of time at home. It's the longest recess that's happened since Donald Trump was elected. And the thing about August recess is in the past, August recess and constituents showing up on the doorstep of members of Congress have actually made a pivotal impact on issues, sometimes in ways that weren't very exciting to many of us. Back in 2010, people may have watched that August recess really set a tone around pushing back around some key issues because there was a number of constituents that were out in town hall meetings and showing up at offices. Now, this is a critical time for making sure that environmental issues and how they're being attacked and the potential cuts to the EPA are seen as a pivotal issue out in communities, and that members of Congress are feeling a lot of pressure to actually do the right thing and not gut the EPA and not continuing to attack environmental issues because their constituents are really upset and are asking them not to, and putting that kind of very public pressure on them. It's also a time when they don't just meet with constituents, but they hold public events like ribbon cuttings. You'll often see them at the county fair or at fundraisers. But they also meet with big business back in their district. So they're getting a lot of pressure, often from the fossil fuel industry, to actually do the wrong thing on these issues. Now, we know that they're expecting people to be out in the streets because there's been a lot of activity when they've gone home recently. But with this time period of a full month, it is critical that we make sure that they're feeling a ton of pressure from people who care about the environment, and not just the pressure that they're going to feel from the fossil fuel industry to continue to gut environmental protections. Now, the last thing I'm going to share before we dive into what it's like to go do meetings with members of Congress is those face-to-face meetings with constituents are still one of the single best ways that you can influence how your member of Congress represents you in Congress and how they view key issues. You're their constituent. They're in D.C. to represent you. Your story has power to shape their policy decisions and voting actions in Congress. It can also redirect a specific Congress person's priority focus or key issue area. It can even inspire them to stand up and be a vocal champion on your issue. Really sitting down with someone and hearing them tell their story. Maybe it's a story about a special place in your district that you've been taking your kids to since they were born that you're worried will be threatened if there's continued attacks on the EPA and environmental protections. Stories like that can really hit home with members of Congress. Republican or Democrat, constituent stories resonate really strongly with them and their staff, and it's one of your most essential tools in influencing your decision maker. You're not going in when you're going in for a local district meeting as an expert. You're going in as a constituent telling your story about what matters to you and what matters to your community. It really helps escalate an issue by going face-to-face to a new level. And it gives you an opportunity to inform or educate a member of Congress or their staff around a key issue and demonstrate support or opposition for an issue that's right in front of them. You have a very powerful voice, and your story matters. Whether it's apparent to you or not, these stories stick with staff and with members of Congress. So just by meeting with them and sharing yours, you're making an impact on their overall impression on a critical issue. Next, Gail is going to share with us exactly how to set up an in-district meeting with your member of Congress office. Gail?
All right, thanks, Liz. My name is Gail, and I am on the Friends of the Earth organizing team based in California. Now, as we mentioned, the August recess is the longest recess during the calendar year, and that means that there is a lot of time that members of Congress can sit down and have meetings with constituents back home. Some of them won't spend the entire recess back home, but they will be back for a significant portion of it. So in order to ensure that you get FaceTime with your senator or congressperson or even their staff, you'll need to get a meeting on the books. I'll walk you through step-by-step how to set up a meeting and give you a couple of tips for getting a meeting with the congressperson themselves instead of their staff. So the first step is to figure out a couple of dates and times that work for you and anyone you're doing the in-district meeting with your member of Congress's office. So that way, if a time that you suggest doesn't work, you're able to suggest new ones quickly. Before you set your district meeting up, it may be good to recruit another person or two to come with you to the meeting. Having more constituents there may increase your chances of meeting with the actual member of Congress themselves, and it's more fun. There's strength in numbers, so reach out to others that you think would be interested in attending the meeting with you. And if you participated in the July vision making tactic, reach out to anyone who attended that as well and invite them to join you at the meeting. The second is to find out who makes their schedule. Now, this may either be their scheduler in DC, or it could be the district director that's based back home. You can find out who either of these staffers are by calling your local district office, and you can find that number on their member website at either senate.gov or house.gov. All you need to do is tell them that you want to set up a meeting with the member of Congress during the recess and ask who to reach out to send a formal meeting request. Of course, get their name and title and phone number if you can. The third step is to draft a formal meeting request and get your request in early. A lot of people will be vying for their time while they're back home. Local governments, interest groups, and lobbyists all try to talk to the member while they're back in the district. That's why it's important to get your request in as soon as you can. Drop a brief email to the scheduler and district director explaining that you're a constituent and that you would like to meet with a congressperson to talk about issues affecting the district. Then suggest a specific time in your email, and this increases the likelihood that you'll get a timely response back, and it opens up the conversation for when you're meeting versus if you're meeting. If you have anyone else joining you at the meeting, maybe some more constituents or other issue groups in the area, make sure to mention that in your letter. And we have a sample request email that you can use, and we'll be sending out that information after the training. The fourth step is to follow up with a phone call. So if you don't hear something back within a day or so, be sure to follow up from your email with a phone call. Keep calling until they respond to your meeting request. And if they say that time doesn't work for the congressperson, suggest a new one. The key here is to be pleasantly persistent. You may get a meeting scheduled with a congressperson or with a member of their staff. Obviously, the best meetings are with the members themselves, but meeting with their staffer is also an important way to influence them. My tip for getting a meeting with your actual senator or representative is to highlight your constituency and something unique that would make the congressperson more likely to meet with you. Tell them if you plan to deliver something. Maybe you participated in our community visioning workshops this month and are presenting a mural or a quilt to the congressperson. Let them know. And once you've secured the meeting time and date, check in with whoever scheduled that meeting the day before to confirm your meeting time. If you're meeting with a staffer, you'll likely be checking in with them specifically, but if your meeting is with a member of Congress, you'll likely be talking to their scheduler or district director. Double check how much time you have with the person you are meeting with so that you can create your agenda accordingly. And then lastly, there may be some meetings that you can't secure. This happens from time to time. You can still meet with a member or a member of their staff. They hold office hours in their district offices while they're home for the recess. And so this is your chance to drop by and meet with them. You can call the district office, tell them you're a constituent, and ask when the member is holding office hours. And you treat that meeting just like a district meeting. However, you may have less time than a traditionally scheduled district meeting. So next, I want to hand it off to Liz Kazel so that she can talk to you about how to actually run an in-district meeting.
Thanks, Gail. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Liz Kazel, and I'm another member of the Friends of the Earth organizing team. I'm actually based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. I am going to go over the basics of meeting with your member of Congress, but first, I just wanted to start off by asking everyone on the call what your overall impression of lobbying is. So I guess we'll start out with first, why do you think we should lobby? If you want to respond, just press 1 on your phone and we can take you off mute. But again, why do we lobby? Why do we meet with them? Press 1 on your phone if you'd like to share. Great. Lots of hands going up. I am going Nancy in 28754. You are off mute.
You want me to talk, Nancy?
Go for it.
The reason we lobby, it's the best way to make an impression on the people that are representing us. I don't know how they know if we don't let them know. And over the years, I've seen that lobbies are the ones that have really made the changes in our government in Washington.
Great. So thank you so much, Nancy, to make our voices heard. That's totally right. Meredith on the social chat has said to be heard, so kind of similar to what Nancy was saying. Rosette in 60091. I'm going to take you off mute. Why do we lobby?
Hi. First of all, I agree with her. That lobbying is where the action is. That's where you get things done. When you meet face-to-face with a person, it's hard they can't push it aside. You're there. You're in their face. You do things politely, and you have a better chance of getting your message across. That's
Great.
how I feel.
Thank you so much, Rosette. And then let's see. We'll take one more. How about Eldon in 05495? Eldon, you
Thanks.
are now off mute.
Thanks. The other thing that comes up is 2 forms of education. I've done lobbying at the state level in the past, and it can be a huge part of what happens in face-to-face meetings, whether it's with congresspeople themselves or their staffers. In many cases, they may not be as familiar with the issues as they'd like to admit, and if we have our acts together, we may be able to give them information that they don't already have. And the other side of that is that we may be able to counter misinformation that they've been given by, in this case, petrochemical lobbyists or the like.
Awesome. Yeah, Eldon, you brought up a great point too. So a couple of things there that Nancy and Rosette and Eldon and others have touched on is that, one, these legislators and lobbyists, or not lobbyists, but members of Congress, they are responsible to us, right? We're their constituents, and at the end of the day, they are accountable to what we say. And, kind of like what Eldon just said, you want to make sure that legislators are aware of kind of all the different issues and stances that are out there. And so oftentimes we may be educating legislators for the first time, or, even kind of countering some of the things that special interest groups are feeding to them. And it brings us to our next point of, fossil fuel companies are lobbying. So, we need to make sure that they're actually beholden to us and not actually beholden to those corporate interests. So great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. I'm going to ask another question, and this one's a little, I think, harder to pin down, but maybe you'll prove me wrong. But what is lobbying? We use this term lobbying all the time, but what do we actually think it is? So again, press 1 on your phone if you want to share, but what is lobbying? Give me a second to read through. Teresa, I see you've got a hand raised in 35255. You are now off mute. What is lobbying?
Lobbying is the process of turning avarice into steel.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
I said lobbying is the process of turning avarice into steel.
Okay. And then so lobbying can be a bunch of different things. So what else do folks think of when they think of lobbying? Again, press 1 on your phone if you would like to share. Let's see. Let's go to Gail Peters.
Gail, you are off mute.
Thank you. I would say persuasion.
Great. So lobbying is like persuading somebody to your side.
And, of course, the negative would be like a Miss Sloan type thing.
Right. Wait, did you say like a what type thing?
Like the movie, Miss Sloan.
Right. Yeah. Like the special interest, exactly. Well, thanks, Gail, for sharing. We'll take one more. David Smith in California. What is lobbying?
Yes, to me, lobbying is making the representative or whoever is speaking to aware of his constituents' desires and to influence their thinking. Bottom line, I believe.
So lobbying is maybe influencing the decision maker. Great. Well, thanks everyone so much for sharing. And I think that at the core, that lobbying is, what we're kind of all saying without saying it out loud is that lobbying is a conversation, right? It's a dialogue. And it's a place where you ask questions and they should ask questions too. But at the end of the day, you're there to, ask them about their stance on the issue. Another thing that we had talked about is that lobbying is also kind of educating an elected official. They're certainly not geniuses on everything. And the biggest part about lobbying is to have an ask. And I'm really grateful that you brought up the movie Sloan, because I think that sometimes we hear the word lobbying and we think of this just negative context, right? We've all heard of the oil company or the special interest that bankrolls campaigns, and then comes into, quote, lobby a member of Congress to do them a favor. That is fundamentally different than what we are talking about tonight, which is a community member sharing their story and voicing their, concerns and opinions about an issue. At the basics, again, with the word lobbying just means a conversation between the member or their staff and you. But to be clear, the type of lobbying that you all will do is very different than what we see kind of in those Sloan type videos or movies. And so we like to call them in-district meetings, and so we're going to continue to kind of refer to them as that. But now now that we all kind of have some sort of grounding and understanding about what these meetings are and why they're important, we're actually going to get down to talk about how to do it. So first, you want to come in with an agenda and think through the 1 or 2 topics you want to cover. You don't need to have what you want to say written out, except for potentially your ask, but you do want to have a general agenda that you want to go over. Don't pack your agenda for the meeting either. Really just have 1 or 2 issues at most that you want to discuss with the congressperson or staffer anymore, and it will really get lost in the meeting. Second, you want to tell your 30-second version of your story or your personal story, and you want to tell it right away. So share with them about why you are there and why you care about what you're fighting for and how that's impacting your life directly. Like we said before, your personal story is very powerful. Remember, you're a constituent and they're beholden to you, and so they need to hear your story. Third, my third tip or the third how-to is to make sure that you have time to ask them your question or what you want them to do directly. If you're coming to ask them to reject gutting the EPA, make sure that you ask it in the middle of the meeting. That way it actually ensures that you have time to do what you came there to do and that they actually have a chance to respond to you directly. If they don't answer or they try to change the subject, just ask it again. It also helps to bring a printed letter that includes your request, something like, protect the EPA from being gutted, as well as your contact information. That way, if you run out of time and you don't get a direct answer, at the end of the meeting, you can hand them a letter and say something like, thanks for taking the time to meet with me. And, this letter outlines my request that you protect the EPA and its funding. And so yeah, if you have that letter, you can leave it behind with them and get another response. Fourth is you want to have a direct ask, and I've said that word a couple of times now, and so your ask is just a clear purpose or distinct position or question or policy stance that you want them to take. So your ask is basically the thing you're trying to get them on record about. I find it actually better if I just write this out ahead of time and practice it a couple of times beforehand. That way you can ask exactly what you came there to ask them. They might not answer it directly, and that's okay. You just need to make sure and ask it directly. So those are the basic how-tos for meeting with your member of Congress. 1, have an agenda. 2, tell them your personal story. 3, leave time to ask your question. And 4, have a clear, distinct purpose or ask that you want them to respond to. If you're delivering something, either maybe your community vision quilt, petitions, or something else, you want to try to get a picture or a photo of yourself actually delivering it to the congressperson or their staff. You can feel free to send it on to us, and we'll actually share them out on social media. Lastly, before we go get an example, I just wanted to give some additional tips that will help you in your meeting. So you'll notice that some of them are repeats of our steps, but they are good tips nonetheless. So my first tip is to just be flexible. These offices are sometimes small, and so meetings may happen, in a lobby or a hallway or, a coffee shop, and that's okay. My second tip is just that you want to be on time, and it's actually is better if you can even get there early. My next tip is to introduce yourself. You want to say where you're from, why you're there, your relevance to the issue. This helps really put the conversation in context. Like we said, your personal story is really powerful, and really remember to have that confidence. It's important to speak with passion and conviction, and know that just your voice alone is just as important as any other constituent. Don't try to be, you don't have to be an expert or to memorize a ton of facts. Your biggest asset is actually your personal story and sharing that with the member of Congress. Emphasize that you're a constituent and that they are there to represent you. Like most conversations, you're going to want it to be about 50-50. So you speak half the time, they speak half the time. So make sure and ask questions. Your first question should, usually be like, what do they know about the issue? Keep in mind that sometimes the members or their staff will actually try to actively derail the conversation. This totally happens sometimes where they will ask follow-up question about where you live or where you work or things like that just to kind of stall out time. They'll start to talk about something else, and all of a sudden most of your meeting is gone. So try to be aware of that and try, if you can, to gently start to steer the conversation back to what you wanted to meet with them about. And my final tip is to have a direct ask. Like we said before, I just put it smack dab in the middle of your meeting. That way, no matter what, you can tell them what you came there to tell them. So those are really the basics. Those are my tips and how-tos for meeting with your member of Congress. We're actually going to send all this material out after the call, so it'll include a sample meeting agenda and talking points. Next up, Jenny's actually going to lead us in a sample of what this might look like.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Liz. So my name is Jenny Bock, and I'm the Northeast Regional Organizer with Friends of the Earth based in Washington, D.C. So hearing about how to have a meeting with your member of Congress is one thing, but it's even better to hear an actual example of this and to practice yourself. And so we're on the phone, so it makes it a little difficult, but we're going to do a shortened version of what an in-district meeting might sound like right now. So Gail, who you heard from earlier, and I are going to be constituents in this scenario, and Liz Kazel is going to play our senator. Liz, in this scenario, is a moderate Republican senator from some New England state, and she vocally supported the Keystone XL pipeline, but also voted to increase funding to national parks and clean water programs. She is most vocal on human trafficking and is working with the rest of her delegation in her state to try and pass a law on the issue this year. So when we're going through this scenario, be on the lookout if you can hear the personal story, our personal stories, and ask in our meeting, the ask that we make in the meeting. So let's get started with the scenario.
Hi, Senator Kazel. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. My name is Gail Schwartzberg, and this is Jenny Bock, and we both live in Springfield.
It is wonderful to meet both of you. It's my pleasure to meet with you.
Hi, Senator Kazel. So we wanted to meet with you today to talk about the Environmental Protection Agency and protecting the environment here in Springfield. So I grew up here, and I spent a lot of time fishing on the lake, going boating and hiking. And it's a really big part of why I chose to stay and settle here in Springfield and start my own business. And that's why I'm so concerned about the attacks on the EPA and why I'm here to talk to you about it.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. And my husband loves to fish as well. What lakes do you find yourself going to the most? Yeah.
Oh, well, I like going to Lake Waterford, and it's actually, in fact, I like it so much, partly because of just the great quality of the lake and how you can still eat the fish in the lake, and because it's so clear and clean. Actually, because of the EPA, it used to not be so clean, but because of a lot of protections from the EPA, it's gotten much cleaner and safer to fish in.
And these EPA protections are exactly what we want to talk to you about. As a mother, I am so concerned about the quality of air and water in our community. My kids rely on clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. Without environmental protections, my kids' future is in jeopardy. So we wanted to know, what is going on with the EPA funding in D.C.? We heard that the agency may be cut as much as 30%. Well, first, ladies, I just want to thank you for your passion and enthusiasm. It's clear to me that you are both deeply connected to the community and to our state, and those are some of the very same reasons that I decided to run for office. So as far as the budget, I have seen the president's budget that proposed those cuts, but honestly, you don't really need to worry because that budget is not going to be the one that we end up with at the end of this process. And, I assure you that I'm doing everything that I can to make sure that our air and water are clean and healthy for our kids. And children are something that I obviously care deeply about, and that's why I'm working to end child trafficking in our state and around the country. And in fact, I'm working on a bill right now that would help end kidnapping on public lands and rest areas and reform the Amber Alert system. So I'm fighting for our kids and our families and for you down in D.C.
Yes, and we really do appreciate the work that you do to protect children, and you can understand why then that this issue is so important to us. Given your commitment to children and protecting their air and water, will you commit to rejecting any budget that guts the EPA?
Well, before I commit to really anything concrete, I'll need to look into kind of the budget details more. I certainly on face value want our air and water protected, but need to see kind of other issues that are going on in the budget and what's going on. So, I can tell you that I will commit to seriously looking at this issue of EPA funding and, making sure that any deal that we come to, that we have clean drinking water and air to breathe. So I can make sure that our staff and follow up with you as we look into it more, and, we'll certainly keep you informed. Well, thank you so much for your time and for meeting with us. We will be sure to follow up with your staff after the meeting.
Great. All right. So thank you, Liz and Gail, for doing that scenario. So now, obviously, that was a very shortened version of what an in-district meeting would look like. So I wanted to quickly take one or two questions or comments from people. What did people notice about the scenario? Keeping in mind the ask and if you heard a personal story. So press 1 on your phone if you want to quickly share an observation. Press 1 on your phone to share. All right. I think so. We have Cam Wilson. Press 1.
Yes.
Cam. Hi, Cam. Yeah.
Yes. Hi. I didn't think she answered the question about whether she would support a bill that would gut the EPA. Maybe
right.
Maybe you could have asked what percent and would she stand for? Would she stand for a 30% cut? Or maybe she would go to 5%. Well, maybe she could go with 5%, but not 10%, and commit to a percentage.
Yes, thank you, Cam. That is a really good observation. It's very common for when you're lobbying a representative that they are vague in answering your question. And it's helpful sometimes, to ask a follow-up question to make sure they properly answer your question. But sometimes they just will purposely be vague the whole time. But asking a follow-up question for them to clarify and ask a more specific question, like what's the specific percentage, is a really good idea. All right, I'm going to take one more. Let's go with Kathy. Oh no, sorry, Gail Peterson.
That was basically my comment, and
okay.
But I mean, it's a little frustrating. I know my senator wouldn't even have a town hall meeting. He has refused. We've asked through Indivisible, and I mean, he's just such a politician that I just feel like we would have to be much more politely forcible to try and force a question, an answer out of him. He speaks politician, and I don't know. I already feel a little discouraged, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk a little bit more because they do have August recess, and they're supposed to be using this time to meet with constituents and districts. But sometimes they avoid this. They don't have public events, and that's partly what the rapid response work we're going to be doing is in terms of tracking down where they'll be and making sure they hear from us whether or not they're having a public event. So I hear you, Gail. Okay, so we're going to move on, but just to point out, so the specific ask in this scenario was, will you commit to, voting against any guts? Will you make sure that the EPA is not gutted, the budget of the EPA? And it's as simple as that. It's, you don't want it to be a long ask, but that is, you're trying to be as direct as possible, and then wait until you have an answer from them. You don't want to add a lot of fluff, or else it'll take away time for them to respond. So again, like Liz says, try to make sure it's 50-50. You give time to talk, and then they give time to talk. Anyway.
Jenny, I want to, this is Liz Butler. So I want to answer what Meredith is asking on social, because I think it's a really important thing for everyone to hear. What she's asking is, the senator said what's in this bill won't be in the budget. How true is this? And what the senator said is in fact true, but merely because what happens is a president sends a budget down to Congress, and it's a pretty big set of wish lists. And then Congress actually workshops it. So it won't be identical to what's in Trump's budget. However, there will be a lot of wheeling and dealing behind closed doors that could keep in massive cuts to the EPA, cuts to Planned Parenthood, lots of things that they want to backdoor into ending programs by using that 51 vote process that Ben was talking about, because they have to get less votes on the budget than they do if they were actually to repeal a law. That said, often what happens when there's massive disagreement in Congress about the budget is they pass something called a continuing resolution. What that does is essentially say all the budgets for last year are now the budgets for this year. That would be a great outcome in this scenario, because it would keep the EPA funded at what it's been funded at, which frankly most of us think needs to be even stronger. And it needs to have more resources to fight fracking, to fight oil interests, to really make sure that it can do enforcement. But to actually go from a 30% cut, 30% plus cut, to the level that it's at right now would be a great win. But no, it's not the case that the president just sends the budget and they rubber stamp it. It's a starting place. Great. So I just wanted to make sure that we addressed that. And I think Gail was going to talk a little bit about the follow-up that we were going to do. Is that right?
Yep. So hi everyone, it's Gail again. I want to go over briefly how to follow up from your in-district meetings and keep connected with Friends of the Earth. So after you meet with your member of Congress or their staff, you should always send a follow-up thank you note to whomever you met with to thank them for taking the time to meet. If you said you'd provide them with any additional information, this follow-up email is a good opportunity to do that. And this will keep the lines of communication open with your senator or member of Congress. The next steps coming out of this call are to schedule your meeting and start preparing. Again, the recess period for when Congress will be home is from July 31st to September 4th, so that's when you should schedule your meeting. There's a chance the Senate will postpone their recess period by a couple weeks to stay in D.C. longer to work on passing another health care bill, but it's looking unlikely at this point. And the sooner you put in your meeting request, the more likely you'll be to get a meeting. So you should send in your meeting request emails within the next 2 weeks, as well as start recruiting other constituents to come with you. Now, after this call, we are going to send you a brief guide that you can use with a sample scheduling email, a sample meeting agenda, and some talking points on the EPA. We'll also be sending around a Google form that you should fill out if you already have a meeting scheduled or if you plan on scheduling a meeting. After you fill out that form, a Friends of the Earth organizer will follow up with you. Additionally, we hold regular activist calls by region to give you a chance to connect with people in your state or area of the country. They're run by myself, Liz Kazel, and Jenny, and are a great way to hear what other people are doing in their part of the country and troubleshoot what is happening on the ground. We invite each of you to join one of these calls if you haven't already, and you'll also get a link to join the Friends of the Earth Volunteers Facebook page, which is a great place to share photos and highlights from your meetings. So finally, I want to talk to you about a pretty exciting tactic that we're launching next month in addition to the in-district meetings. And this tactic is joining our rapid response team, which at its core is really about making sure that throughout the month-long recess, we are getting the attention of our members of Congress as much as possible. And I know we've already talked about this a little bit, but pressuring your member of Congress at a grassroots level is truly one of the most effective ways to make sure they understand that they can't let Trump get away with this absurd budget. And for those who are with Trump's budget, pressuring them at a grassroots level is a way to let them know that they're not getting away with it either. We've seen time and time again that citizens speaking out during a congressional recess can change the nature of politics. We saw this happen 7 years ago when Obama was working to pass the Affordable Care Act, and we've seen this happen over the short recesses we've had during the last 6 months as people have turned out in droves to stand up for the environment, their health care, and a whole slew of other issues during these recesses. But this August recess is the longest of the calendar year, and so we want to take full advantage of this opportunity to keep the pressure on Congress. In some states, your members of Congress are totally with the environment, but it's their responsibility to convince their peers in Congress who disagree to vote against the budget. In other states, your members of Congress are on the fence, and we need to make sure they hear from their constituents more than they're hearing from big oil and big business. And in some states, your members of Congress have helped write the very budgets we disagree with, and we need them to know that they're not truly being representative of the people. Now, regardless which of these categories your member of Congress falls under, the key to making sure they know what the people want is to get their attention as much as possible this recess. So if they're hosting a town hall or a coffee with Congress, we should be there. If they're holding office hours or attending a public event like a fundraiser, we should go. And if they're nowhere to be seen, we should be outside of their office and on social media, making sure everybody knows. In addition to being present at their public appearances, we are going to post on social media to keep up the momentum and to keep the pressure on Congress to keep the EPA funded. So we are going to do a training call next Monday, so a week from today at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, where we'll be talking more about what exactly the Rapid Response Team will be doing and doing a quick training on how to get your member of Congress's attention. And if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in doing, I'm just going to have you go ahead and push 1 on your phone right now, and so that we know who's interested in perhaps joining the call and we can send you more information. So again, if you're interested in attending our training call where you can learn more about the Rapid Response Team and how you can do some extra stuff in addition to lobbying next month, press 1 on your phone right now and we'll send you some more information about that call. All right, I'm going to give y'all back over to Liz.
Great. Well, people are raising their hand for the rapid response team, which is one of those critical things. Someone earlier asked on the phone about what do we do when our member won't set up a town hall meeting. Well, the rapid response team is totally going to be one of those things to help address that. That's looking for public events and other things where people are able to put members of Congress on the spot, ask them questions, tell them a quick story, and pressure them to protect the EPA and on other issues. So it's going to be a really critical time to make sure that if they happen to be at the state fair, that someone's walking up to them and saying, will you protect our environment, and vote against gutting the EPA while they're getting a pretzel dog. So it's going to be a really, really important time this August. This is one of the most pivotal moments of the last rather crazy year, is this time when all these members of Congress can get out of their bubble in D.C. and have to go home and face their constituents and face the communities that they've been talking about gutting things like the EPA that will actually really hurt local communities. We can't wait to hear how your lobby visits go, so look for the follow-up materials. Make sure that you're reporting back. It really is at these face-to-face meetings of an actual community member talking to them and connecting with them on a human level and asking them directly to help fight for what's right in their communities that can have such a big impact. So we're looking forward to hearing about the meetings that you have. We're glad that you were able to join us tonight. We are going to end the call in just a second, but look forward to the materials. And like Liz and Gail and Jenny mentioned, look forward to the information about the regional calls so you can connect with other people in your region and brainstorm how to put as much pressure on members of Congress this August in your local area. Liz, Jenny, Gail, anything else you want to add?
I would say if folks have more follow-up, like just clarifying or questions, definitely us organizers will be following up with you individually. Just go ahead and fill out the Google form, just saying that you're interested in participating and doing an in-district meeting, and we'll reach out and talk with you one-on-one.
Great. Gail, Liz?
Nope, I don't have anything to add.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I hope you have a good Monday, and we look forward to turning the heat up in August. Bye.